Hello, everybody, and welcome to Betweenplays Stock Market Strategies. Today, a little bit different than usual. Um, we usually have CEOs of companies on here, analysts, and today, which is really interesting, we have Mayor Rabkin, founder and managing partner of Blue Vision Capital. Mayor, how are you doing today?
Doing well, thank you.
I'd like to thank you so much for being on the show. A lot of people talk about, you know, green energy, renewables, and all this kind of stuff. We're always looking at the future. There's so much that we need to talk about here. We got Paris Accord agreements. We're looking at climate change. We're looking at the heating of the planet. So I love the fact that we're on here and that we can show the world, what's out there now. What are the possibilities? But before we do all of that, if we could just talk a little bit about you, look into your background, if you can go into that a bit, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Albert, for having me on the show today. So I, as mentioned, founded Blue Vision Capital, which is a venture capital fund focusing on climate tech startups, which has been a very exciting journey and a very purposeful journey. My background has always been in the investment space, and I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an investor. I've worked at various firms in the past, mostly in public markets, in wealth management, spent some time in the banking sector, and spent quite a bit of time as well in very large asset management firms. And as I grew in experience and in my career, and as I developed a great network, I realized that, I wanted to transition into essentially something that was, for me, a higher purpose. And of course, the climate is something that not only I'm very passionate about, but I'm also quite concerned. And if I could use my access to capital for good, to me, that would have been incredible. And so that's how my journey into climate tech began.
That's very interesting. So the climate tech, I like the way you put that. It's true. I mean, like we have a lot of investors on the channel. I mean, we're looking at critical minerals. It's the talk of not just a day, but it's been the talk of a few years now. I mean, with governments signing all of these bills in order to protect what we have. So, I mean, very interesting. This is not just something that's a fly by night. We're looking at the future here. That being said, can you go a little bit into Blue Vision Capital? Like, can you elaborate on the fund? What is it that you guys do there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So at Blue Vision Capital, the idea is really to focus or to back entrepreneurs or startups that are disruptive, that are breakthrough, that are innovative, that are venture scalable, which is really important. So we're looking for, I'd say, capital efficiency, um, but that are also doing something to combat the climate crisis. And so what we're really looking for is that intersection of both high impact, but also high returns. And when we find that sweet spot, I mean, that's exactly what gets us quite excited. So in terms of verticals, I'd say we're relatively broad, but we are typically looking for verticals that I'd say are ripe for disruption. The way we do that is typically looking at spaces that have a very strong impact, but are typically underfunded. Some of the verticals that we look at are mobility solutions, sustainable economy, energy transition, climate management, built environment, food systems, and land use. But built environment is actually a great example because buildings today represent 39% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And yet, it only represents about 7% of funding in the climate space. So it's a very underfunded space, very much ripe for disruption, and in our opinion, a huge catalyst for growth.
Okay, I understand. And for climate tech, I mean, is this you consider this like more like a recession-proof industry?
Recession-proof is a big word, but like one thing for sure is that the future is climate tech, and when you look at some of the trends that we've seen, at least in the last year or two, so when you look at VC broad-based, right? You look at
Okay.
total VC investments in 2021 and you compare it to 2022, you've seen about a 35% year-over-year drop in funding, right? From about 600 billion to about 415 billion. Now, take a look at just climate tech alone. And climate tech in 2021 was about 37 billion, and 2022 was 70 billion. So more than double.
Wow.
So you're seeing that there was a total reversal happening. I'm not going to say that it's going against the current, or but we are definitely noticing that there is something that is shifting. And I think part of the reason is that climate tech will be essential to 2050 world, right? And just in Canada alone, they'll need to invest about $125 billion every year to build a net zero economy by 2050. Globally, we're going to require about $1.7 trillion
Wow.
per year for at least 20 years. And so there's a tremendous amount of capital that's going in these spaces. And it's not for nothing that you hear Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, saying
Yeah.
that the next 1,000 unicorns will be in the green energy space.
True.
John Kerry said the same thing. He said clean energy is one of the greatest economic opportunities the world has ever seen. Right. So I think that there's no line of business that will not be impacted by climate change, and there lies the opportunity.
Absolutely. And what are the sectors that you're mostly focusing on?
So we're very excited by, let's say, three sectors in particular. One is the energy transition.
Yep.
Uh, at the end of the day, 25% of global emissions are related to energy. We are facing an energy crisis, and there is a tremendous amount of disruption, innovation in that space. I would say we do have a lot of very interesting solutions around that, around the intermittency, around the renewable energy. I mean, it's definitely at an inflection point because right now the cost parity between renewables and traditional coal and gas is coming to a point where it makes economic sense. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of innovation there. Another one I would say is built environment, as I mentioned earlier. There's a lot of innovation that needs to be done within buildings, and there's a lot of incentives because at the end of the day, if you save the bottom line, if there's tremendous cost savings, everybody's going to want to jump on the bandwagon. I think the problem with Clean Tech 1.0 is that it was very expensive. It didn't make economic sense. The
Yeah.
market wasn't ready. And so it didn't take off. But right now, if you could save 10% off of a profit margin, off the bottom line, and you're greener at the same time in parallel, I mean, that's a great business case. So built environment is another one. I would finish off by saying that food systems, um, very exciting, a difficult space though. So I'd say we're tiptoeing into that. We're excited by it.
Okay.
We're careful on the food.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. I understand. And what are some of the advantages of investing in emerging managers? If you can get into that a little bit.
Yeah. So it's pretty interesting, but when you look at emerging managers,
Yeah.
so traditionally there has been a outperformance of emerging manager funds versus other traditional funds, and I guess there's a greater sense of accountability and dedication to achieving superior results. I mean, you realize when you're an emerging manager that your long-term success really relies on your performance. So there's definitely potential, I'd say, for higher alpha generation. Emerging managers also have the advantage of typically being a bit more nimble, more agile than some of the larger players. And so, you could really capitalize on market inefficiencies. And and so this is why when you talk to a lot of asset allocators that invest in emerging managers, they'll be the first to tell you that, yeah, the outperformance is quite clear, and it's not just 1 year, it's year over year. You look at the stats over the last 20 years, and numbers don't lie. I mean, I am an emerging manager. I am extremely dedicated, and I'm in it to win it. So very exciting times ahead.
I like that. I like the whole I win it to win. I'm in it to win it. I mean, very important to have that mindset. Now when we talk about Blue Vision Capital, and we look at the macroeconomics, I think this is very important that we touch off on this maybe as a last question in here. When we're looking at fossil fuels and we're looking at Paris Accord agreements, we're looking at all the things I said in the beginning over here of climate change, the warming up of the planet. In your I guess educated viewpoint, on your perspective, do you think that we can go back in time, that we'll go back to the way things were? I mean, in taking the macroeconomics into consideration, the geopolitics of the way things are, and at the same time, the Paris Accord agreements, because people, sometimes they see the markets are doing this, whatever. They're not looking towards that 2050 that you mentioned just a few seconds ago. But for me, we're going there, because we have certain things in place. We can see automobile dealers, manufacturers that are making the transition. They have goals set out. Governments have goals set out. What's your view on all of this?
Well, listen, I think that to change human behavior, you have to put the right incentives in place.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
we have seen that there's been a great shift in the regulatory environment. So if you look at the federal budget in Canada, they've committed to $83 billion in clean economy tax credits. If you look at the United States, the Inflation Reduction Act, they're
Yeah.
allocating about $370 billion in investment subsidies. So I think that this capital is certainly going to create tremendous incentives for the climate tech space. And I think the governments are doing it because they do realize that this is a very critical urgency, and it's happening now. And then the reality is even if we stop emitting CO2 tomorrow entirely as a planet, there was so much CO2 accumulation, and often there's a lag of 20, 30 years from CO2 to hit, the greenhouse gases,
Yes.
that we're in serious trouble. And so the good news is that there is a lot of innovation there. It makes a tremendous amount of economic sense. The regulatory incentives are finally at the right place. Let's not forget that the United States, under the previous administrations, was more reluctant to sign Paris Agreement accords. But now
Yes.
under the current administration, they're going the other extreme.
Yep.
And I think that this obviously will be, in my opinion, a very strong catalyst for the entire sector, but more above and beyond just financial returns. I think for survival as humans on this planet, this is integral. So it's a win-win on all fronts.
Yeah, that's very true. It's very hard to debate any of the points that you brought up there. Completely in line with those points. Now, just talk about Blue Vision Capital. Maybe to end off on this. So, when you look at investment criteria for Blue Vision Capital, what is it that you're looking at? I mean, because I've seen on your website that you have certain points. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit, and maybe also talk about what you guys target? Your mobility solutions, energy transition. Get it to that a little bit, please.
Sure. So I think there's three layers to that question. So the first thing is that we are considered a strategic player, at least in Montreal, where we're based. And the reason I say that is that we're filling an important gap in the ecosystem. When you look at venture capital as a whole, there's a lot of capital for more late stage, Series A, Series B, and onwards. But when you look at seed specific and you look at climate tech specific, there is a total gap. So when you address a gap in the ecosystem and you directly, what that allows you to do is to handpick from the best opportunities. You're not too concerned about being outbid, but when it's a very saturated market, it typically goes to the highest bidder. We don't have that issue. Quite the contrary. If you look at the supply and demand, there's a huge demand of startups looking for money. Very limited supply of actual funds focusing on seed stage. So I think that that's one piece that's very interesting. The second is, when we look at a business, we're looking at about 8 metrics, right? And starting off, obviously, the environmental impact. But for us, the business model is really important. Are the profit margins at least, 60, 70, 80%? What are the KPIs? What is the cash runway? We're looking at, for us, it's important to have a low CapEx play. You could easily get burned if you get into high CapEx type opportunities. So we're looking for that asset light sleeve. The team, of course, is extremely important. The tech, the product, the service, right? Is it disruptive? It's a breakthrough. What's the IP around it? Market, how's the TAM? For us, minimum 500 million TAM and above for us to be able to make a deal. So we're looking at a lot of these metrics. And once all these metrics are filled, we then start thinking about, okay, what's our post-investment strategy? Okay, once we've made the investment in that business, now what do we do?
Yes.
Well, we're going to do everything we can to make sure it's successful. So how do we do that, right? Well, we sit on their boards. We try to give them the mentorship, the coaching, the direction. We help them connect with new customers. We do whatever we can to help them on every aspect we can, because their success at the end of the day is our success. And for us, we're looking for that 10x return multiple per business, per company. And I believe very strongly that in order to achieve that and to maximize the odds in your favor, you definitely want to have a very solid post-investment strategy as much as just a pre-investment strategy. So that's kind of how we think about investing in businesses globally.
Very interesting. I like the mindset. Completely agree with it. I mean, there's nothing you could debate on that as well. Mayor Rapkin, I mean, we're going to wrap this up. I mean, is there any last words that you might like to say? Because, I mean, we know what Blue Vision Capital is about. We love the strategy. We love, the basically, I don't want to, the green of it all, and where it's going. do you have any final words that you would like to be able to put out there, whether it's towards macroeconomic of things, or just of the company, or a little bit of both?
I would say that I still think that there is a little bit of I'd say post-traumatic, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder from people who invested in the first wave of clean tech, which
Yeah.
was about 10 years ago. And you have John Doerr, who from Klein and Perkins, who was actually a pioneer in clean tech. And many of you may know, but Klein and Perkins is one of the more successful venture capital funds out of Silicon Valley. And they got burnt. They got totally burnt investing in clean tech. They were doing these big, renewable energy products. And so there's a lot of PTSD around that.
Yeah.
And my message to new investors who maybe have had a bad experience the first time around, to say, you know what, I think that today climate tech has moved beyond a proof of concept. I think that we are definitely at an inflection point. I think the time is now. And I think it's the most exciting space to be in. So I highly encourage all of you to reach out and to learn more about the space. And I'm happy to share my thoughts around it. But I think it's, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking for the next biggest unicorns, and climate tech, in our opinion, is the next internet.
Mayor Rapkin, thank you so much for being on Between Plays Stock Market Strategies. I'd like to be able to have you in the future and see where we are and how things go with the fund, and just talking about the macroeconomic space. If you'd ever like to just come on and talk about green tech and stuff like that.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right. Well, for all the viewers out there, always remember: research, prepare, plan, and execute. So thank you so much, Mayor Rapkin, and hope to see you in the future.
You bet.
Between Plays, it's the journey and what you do between where you are and where you want to be. Research, prepare.
Disclaimer: Between Plays has a contract with said company in this video at the time of recording. Between Plays only takes contracts with companies we believe have an opportunity to deliver a product or service based on our own research. That being said, always do your due diligence. Seek professional financial analyst when investing. This video is for entertainment, educational, informative purposes. See description for more information.
Between Plays, bridging the gap between companies and investors.